Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for the Office of Global Services summer enrollment information. We will let some folks make their way in, and we'll start in just a minute. All right. Looks like we might have met the group for today. Just wanted to kick off and let folks know if you have not met me, I'm Dr. Shannon Fairley Pittman, director of our Global Network First Year program. So I'm so excited to be able to support our current Global Scholars and London Scholar students. We are holding this webinar in collaboration with our colleagues in the Office of Global Services. Many of you might have already been in contact with them, but this webinar is an option, information session for you to be able to learn about the summer enrollment information, as many of you might be thinking about and planning to take classes in U Boston or in U Oakland. And so just before I turn it over to my colleague, Jasgard, who will begin with the presentation, just wanted to give you remind you of some housekeeping. We are holding the session today. This is being recorded, so we will send out a follow-up email with the recording, and you'll be able to have access to it and can watch it again or share it with others. And for the presentation, we are hopeful that you're just going to sit back and let Jasgard be able to share the information that you need. Again, this information, some of it might already live on our websites, and Jasgard might have already been sending out information via his department. And I'm sure he'll share contact information as well. So you'll be able to reach out should you have any more questions. But if you do have a pressing question during the presentation, you can look at the bottom of your screen. There is a Q&A box. So feel free to place your question there. We're actually going to maybe hold on those questions in terms of answering them during the presentation, and we'll just be able to call them out at the end, or again, direct you appropriately to the email address where you can get your questions answered. But again, we're hopeful that the presentation will address much of your questions during this time. All right, with that, I will kick it over to Jasgard.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Shannon, for the introduction, and thank you everyone here. We appreciate your time and energy joining us for the session today and learning about summer enrollment, and really trying to dive into what may be needed to make that happen if that is something you're considering. I want to start off, of course, with who I am in my office, just to set the stage, but we are the Office of Global Services. We are the international student branch on campus, really supporting all international students from beginning to end in their timeline at Northeastern. And that covers a wide variety of things, in terms of what you may reach out to us for, in terms of arrival, what that looks like to be aware of your status. If you're considering changing status potentially because you want to change to F1 status as an example, because there's benefits tied to that status, we'll be happy to talk to you about that. In terms of long-term goals you may wish to pursue in terms of academic goals or employment goals, travel considerations, these are all things that we cover within our office and much more. So just a slight intro here just to make sure you know who we are and what we handle. And of course, my name is Jasgard Demunch. I'm the Associate Director of International Student Services at OGS. So to set the stage, I did want to make sure that you're in the right session you need to be and addressing the right audience that I want to make sure gets this information. So to start, this session really is geared towards folks who are interested in changing to F1 status or who already are on F1 status or will be on F1 status for the future summer term. If you are a permanent resident or a student who is already on a visa eligible, a study eligible visa that allows you to study full time, this session doesn't need to pertain to you. Things in this session will not be relevant to you specifically. So just to start off, that is something that I want to make sure you are aware of. Secondly, this session really is tied to specifically students who, one, aim to be inside the US during the summer term, some portion during the summer term, and two, plan to study at Northeastern specifically during the summer term inside the US. So if those two specific permutations aren't exactly your situation, there might be some things that aren't specifically highlighted in this webinar specifically. If you do have something that is not covered because you have a different option, if you're considering maybe studying outside the US during the summer, or another option that you're considering, please reach out to our office and we can talk specifically about your case details and make sure you're very aware of all the nuances that may come because you have a slightly shifting changes to what you need to do in that specific situation. So that's kind of the level setting piece for who should be here. But with that, I did want to showcase information tied to eligibility options for the summer. This was emailed out a little bit ago, but I do want to start with this to make sure you are aware of what is available to you as of the summer. And that is dependent on where you are currently and the program you're studying in. So if you are in the US now as a global scholar, you do have the option to study for any of the three summer options for summer one, summer two, or summer full. If you are a global scholar in London currently or a London scholar, summer two would be the option that you would have available to you. So just keep those dates and those timelines in mind when you're considering future registration for those courses. Okay, so talking about expectations, I did want to start by stating, that there are some expectations that are needed to be upheld to maintain F1 status during the summer. And depending on when you plan to study during the summer, these are things you want to be keeping in mind when you're actively studying. I do want to stress this because if you choose to study during the summer, we do consider summer at this point a required term of study if you're inside of the US on an I20. So you'd have to make sure you're maintaining the requirements that we outline on this page here so that you can continue without any problems on your visa status and any future benefits and future studies that you plan to do. F1 status does expect a certain level of on-ground presence to maintain your status. So if you're thinking about doing a majority level of online courses during the summer, or maybe only one online course during the summer, as an example, that wouldn't meet the criteria needed to satisfy the F1 visa requirements for this term. So just keep that in mind. But I do want to go over the actual enrollment options here in terms of what you should be thinking about when you are choosing your plan to study for the summer. But if you're studying in summer one or summer two, we do expect students to be enrolled in a minimum of 6 credits. That is the immigration requirement to be enrolled in. This may realistically be 8 credits because of the courses that you're enrolling in. So that might be a little bit of a shift, but we do require on-ground presence for that term specifically. So if you're thinking about studying only in summer two, as an example, you would have to have on-ground presence in summer two. We do allow a maximum of 1 online class during the term that you wish to study within. So if you're doing summer two, again, as the same example, you could have a situation where you are doing a 1 on-ground class and then 1 online class, and that would meet the threshold for credits needed to be enrolled, on-ground presence, and some flexibility if you did want to have that online class. If you want to do on-ground fully, that's up to you as well too. But that's one, I had to want to make sure that was something that was readily acknowledged in the beginning when you are beginning your planning for enrollment for the summer. Okay, so highlighting a few timelines here. I know a couple weeks ago, there was the registration window did open up for all students to begin to register for summer. So that did ultimately end up opening by the end of the 21st of February. So right now we are in the situation where you are able to register for summer, and to do so beyond that on the immigration side is to do certain action with OGS to either extend your current I-20 if you're ready inside the US, or have an I-20 that is valid, or to apply for a brand new I-20 if you haven't entered the US yet during your current program. Once again, I do want to stress that this does essentially set you onto that track and solidify you onto that track of study when this does happen. So if you are on the fence about what your options are, if you're thinking about maybe doing a majority of online classes because you have other plans during the summer, we can talk about that in an appointment or in a discussion through our online portal, but we want to make sure that this is understood that once you are doing the action to begin this process, we're expecting you to continue onward to keep that action going forward and attend the summer enrollment during that time. For global scholars, this process would be a process called the program extension request. And I'll show you that on the next slide of how that looks like and what to expect. And for London scholars, this would be completing the pre-arrival I20 request e-form, which I will also showcase what to expect, how to apply for an I20, assistance with other documentation you would need for applying for a visa, and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind. We're going to cover these things in detail, but we're always happy to talk about them in more specific to your case later, should you want to do so. Okay, so starting for global scholars, the program extension process. We have a few things on this page, but this process ultimately does allow us to extend your current I20 to the appropriate end date of your expected time for study during the summer. The I20, as you may know, ultimately has to cover the length of time when you're actively studying. The I20 is a document that allows you to study in the US, so it has to be up to date in terms of what your timeline for study is. Uh, Also, this documentation and this process will need academic verification to verify that you are enrolled in the appropriate coursework for that term. So we'll talk about that very shortly in terms of how that process would go. But on the other piece of the slide here is kind of a visual screenshot of what the form would look like. There is a section where you would complete on your end who you are, what program you're studying in, things of that nature. And then the academic side would be verifying this other sections on this page. So we have a contact here. Her name is Alison Ottaviano. You may have reached out to her or heard about her before. She will be the lead in assisting with this process for the academic verification piece. We do have her email over here, a.ottaviano at northeastern.edu. This would be the person you would send this completed forms, completing being only part one being completed, to Allison. At this point, you would want to make sure you are already enrolled in the coursework that you expect to do for the summer, because that will be the first check on the academic side to verify your enrollment to make sure you are appropriately enrolled for the term, but also meeting the expected visa requirement enrollment for that term as well. So that should be done before you email Allison. Once that's done, Allison will email you back with the completed form, and then you will be able to submit this form over to our office through the program extension e-form. There are some documents you do have to submit alongside that, namely some financial proof for the extended term, but we'll talk about that on the next slide. Right over here. Fantastic. Okay, so what documents are needed for this program extension process? Number one, the form we just looked at, the program extension form that's completed and signed by Allison specifically. Number two is financial documentation proving you have funding for this extended term of study. As you remember, when you applied for the I-20 for the first time, you did have to showcase funding for some length of time in your program to allow you to study and to show proof that you can be in the US and are able to sustain your time in the US. This would be needed once again for this extended term of study because this was not verified previously during the first time you applied for your I-20. So on this document, you would need to make sure the funds are liquid in nature. So it would have to be in some kind of account that does have liquid funding, either checking or savings. There's many types of accounts that exist that are liquid in nature. But just keep that in mind. We are verifying that the funds are in a liquid account or in an account type that is liquid by default. Number two, the document should be issued within 1 year of the summer start term. So realistically speaking, this would be sometime from last summer up until now. We want to verify that there is funding that can meet that criteria. And lastly, the funds don't have to be frozen or have a future maturity date to be considered on our review. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about these situations and what documentation you are trying to provide to our office for those next steps. We do have a full breakdown of what is also considered for the financial requirements, but those are the main ones that usually have some considerations or hiccups when students are asking questions about. But we have the link here that you can definitely see in terms of the full breakdown of what that looks like. Talking about the financial piece, We did break down here as well the required funding amount needed to be shown in order for this to go through. So you can see kind of our calculations here in terms of the cost per credits that take into consideration, the credits you'll be taking, and the amount of time you'll be in the US during this term. So all these are kind of outlined here. But for the numbers specifically, you can see them on the section here in terms of if you are considering summer one, summer two, or summer full. We do have a range here because the bottom number in that range is ultimately meaning if you are studying in six credits during summer one or summer two, which is the immigration requirement for study. But the top range is tied to what may likely be the case if you are enrolling in 4 credit courses. This would be the amount of funding that would likely need to be shown on that documentation. So just keep that in mind, depending on how much, how many credits you're enrolling for, you would ultimately have to showcase funding tied to that amount during this process specifically. And if you're studying in summer full, you see the amount here as well too that covers the amount that's needed for the entirety of summer, which doesn't have any variation required to be shown. So these are things that you want to keep in mind when you are going through that program extension process and prepping for that step. Okay, so moving on to London Scholars. We want to make sure that students who are in this program really understand the beginning process of what an I20 is. So I do have this one slide here to really talk about what that looks like and why this is a required step in this process. The I20 essentially is a document of eligibility that allows you to study inside the US for a length of time that is dictated on the I20. So this is something that we would need to create for you to ultimately begin that process for applying for that F1 visa to allow you to study full-time inside of the US at Northeastern. Depending on what you plan to do, there are options of where you can apply for that visa. It could be currently in London now if you are spending time there and are wish to begin the process soon. It can be done in your home country if you plan to do that during the summer, or it can be done even in a third country that allows for applications to be submitted at the visa or embassy consulates available in that nation, in that region. So keep that in mind when you're planning your situation. And I always say when you're doing this process, if you're thinking about this to apply sooner rather than later, the visa process can take some time in terms of the embassies going through the process of approval and making sure everything is good to go. So the more time you have available for yourself, I would say the better. But of course, if you're considering these options still, we wouldn't want you to submit if you're not prepared to do so. So there's a balancing act there in terms of what would be best for you. But we want to make sure that you are aware that some of these processes do take time that is outside of Northeastern's control because it's with the government specifically and not with our office. But talking about the I-20 process through the pre-arrival e-form, there are some pieces here that you'd want to be mindful of as well. The required documentation must be submitted either in a PDF or a JPEG format. Keep that in mind when you're thinking about that. We do need a copy of the identity page of the passport. So the one that has the picture of you on there is the page we're talking about. And as we talked about previously, proof of liquid assets through the financial proof would be needed to create that I-20 as well. For this step, we would also need if the currency is not in USD, proof of that currency conversion. So we know exactly what the conversion is from that native amount to the USD. And also, if you are sponsored by a non-relative, we do need an affidavit of support showing that they are acknowledging that they're able to support your studies during that time. All of this is covered on the e-form, and there are links on the e-form specifically that give you a template for these things, such as the currency conversion and the sponsor letter template. So no need to find something external. It's all covered within the e-form specifically. So just read the e-form as you're going through it, and you will know exactly what is going on and how to submit those documents to us. We do have a link here. And of course, you'll be getting a copy of this presentation afterwards, but we do have the link here and where to begin that process. But the biggest part after you begin that process and receive the I-20 from us is applying for the visa itself. We recommend that you follow kind of our three links here in terms of the next steps available. The first one covers the F1 student visa process in general. So talking about the beginning process after you get your I-20, what do you need to do? What do you need to prepare for when you're going to the embassy? What questions you may be asked when that happens as well, to kind of have the mental awareness of what to expect when you're going through the entirety of the F1 visa application process. The second link is the visa appointment wait times. So this is a updated link, updated every week in terms of what embassies have certain timelines available for the wait times done. So you'll see on the website, if you go to the link, it will showcase the list of all the embassies in the world, and you can look at the specific location you're thinking about, and you can see the wait times of how long it takes for you to get an appointment at that location. And this done as said, this is done in real time. So ultimately, I would recommend looking at it maybe, in the beginning to get familiar with what the process looks like, but more closely to when you also intend to apply with them to know an updated timeline of what that could look like in terms of if there's a 1 week wait or a shorter wait or a longer wait. It's all detailed on that website there. And lastly, the website we have for arriving in the US. This really is a overarching piece of now that I know that I'm ready to enter the US, I have my proper documentation. What should I do when this happens? Do I need to have other things on my person when I'm coming into the US? Do I have things in my carry-on? These are things that are all covered here. And of course, when you physically arrive in the US, the things you would need to do to activate your F1 status when you arrive. So these are all some resources we have that are pretty comprehensive in terms of these steps. But as I said, we're always happy to talk in more specific details with you individually if you have questions about what's online or if you have questions about a process that isn't online that you think would be helpful to discuss with our office. We're always happy to do so. Okay, one thing I do want to highlight for everyone involved in this process is that this I-20 process will only cover the I-20 adjustment or I-20 creation for summer 2025. So this will allow you to study for the entirety of summer, as dictated by the I-20, as dictated by your program, and of course as dictated by your studies. But this is not a process that will allow you to study for the fall and beyond. This is a separate process that would still need to be done to make sure that we have the right information after you complete your program and to make sure you are getting a multi-year I-20 at that point. I know if you've already been in this process before, there are several steps that have happened and it might be confusing in the beginning of receiving multiple I-20s throughout this process. We understand that is a bit of a hurdle, but this will be kind of the final hurdle, if you will, in terms of changing your I-20 over to your bachelor's program and having a multi-year I-20 that will allow you to study for the entirety of your bachelor's program after that. Of course, if there are any changes in your time in your studies then, we will need a new I-20 then, but we'll talk about that at a future time. But I do want to set the stage now in saying that this I-20 process will only cover summer, and then you have another process that we'll email you about starting next month. So you're aware of that process as well for how to apply for an I-20 for future, for the fall and onward. Okay, so I wanted to keep this kind of short and sweet in terms of highlighting what is needed and highlighting what you might be thinking about. In order to contact us, of course, we have a couple of ways to do that. We have our main website here, international.northeastern.edu/OGS, and this is kind of our one-stop shop for all information available for things you may be thinking about from arrival, enrollment, employment, travel, everything under the sun. We do have some website likely on our page. So make sure you check out the page if you have any questions that you want to dive deeper into. But if you have something more specific you want to talk to us about, we do have our inquiry forum that we do use to connect with our office. We highlight that this might take somewhere between 1 to 3 days, depending on the time it's been submitted and the complexity of the questions. But we do want to make sure that that is known when you're submitting that to our office for just general awareness. Um, but yeah, we just want, as I said, want to keep this kind of short and sweet to make sure you know the basics of what's needed, the processes if you are considering summer enrollment, and really how to reach our office to make sure we go deeper into those questions if you happen to have them. So I want to leave it there. I will take some time now to look at the Q&A and see if there's anything that we want to address here to make sure that we're covering for any confusion of things that either were not mentioned or things you have more interest about.
Yes, thank you, Jascard. Very helpful information. Again, folks, this is being recorded, so you will receive this presentation and email probably sometime next week. And so please do check back with that once you get it. Just guard the one question we do have in the chat mentions, what if I only take online classes during summer too, as I won't be in the US? I have an internship this summer, but would like to take still like take summer classes, but only online ones. Does this mean that I need to maintain on-ground presence? I guess just maybe thinking through online courses and what that looks like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And great question. If you're thinking about online as an option, I'm happy to talk about that one as well. So if you're originally thinking about doing primarily online classes, that is certainly fine to do so if the coursework is available for you to do so. You are correct in the question that this would mean that you're choosing not to be inside the US during this time if your plan was to be on F1 status because you would not be able to maintain on-ground presence during that time. And that's perfectly fine to do so. If your intention is to be back home or in a third country during the summer, attend online classes, and strictly do that, that will be perfectly fine to do so. There is no issue or no detriment to your status in that situation. In this case, you would be going through the process of really um, updating your I20 to direct for the fall and beyond. So you would skip the summer enrollment process that we talked about here today specifically, and you'll be going through that I20 process. That will be kind of identified a little bit later. As I mentioned, in March, we'll talk more about how to go through that process specifically for updating your I20 to go directly for the fall. But if you are planning to do only summer courses online and don't intend to be inside the US, that's not a violation of your F1 status, and there's not a problem to do so in terms of your ultimate plan. There's only consideration if you want to be inside the US, there is that limitation then. But if you're outside the country, you're happy to stay abroad and study as you see fit. Thank you for the question.
So just looking at the Q&A box, it looks like that was the only one that was left unanswered, but maybe we'll stick around for another minute or so just to see if folks had any last minute questions before we let Jascard go for today. All right. We might have helped everyone with their questions, Jascard. Look at that. Success.
I'm okay with that.
Exactly. Oh, it looks like we got maybe one more.
Mhm.
When will the visa process start for the fall?
Yeah, fantastic. Great question. Yes. So you'll get information from our office specifically in March. So in a couple of weeks, also check your email. You'll learn more about the process of how to apply for a process called the change of degree level. Ultimately speaking of changing your I20 from your current program now to the fall and what's needed. It will be also kind of similar to what you've done previously in terms of updating that, but you'll get more detail specifically as we go through the process in March. So keep an eye on your email for then, and you know all those details as they crop up.
Awesome. Thanks, Justgard.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, well then maybe we'll slow roll our way out. Again, we are so pleased that folks made their way on the call today. We're excited that folks are continuing to think about summer courses at our NU Boston campus and NU Oakland campus. for me, I'm wishing folks well as they are entering the last few weeks of their time at NU London and NU Oakland in our two programs, Global Scholars and London Scholars. As Jasgard mentioned, continue to keep checking your email and making sure you're up to date with all the information that we're sharing. We will continue to host a few different webinars, so please look out for that. And again, feel free to check our website for any information that might be relevant for you. But with that, we are so pleased that Jasgard hung out with us today and gave us some information about this. We will be sending out the recording and the presentation so folks have access to this. And we will look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a good day.
Think so.